Imagine trying to explain something really massive, like a huge turning point in history, but to someone super smart.
Yeah,
You wouldn't focus on the obvious stuff, right? You go deeper.
right, to the details that actually make them think.
Exactly. Like those things that really show how everything connects.
Yeah.
Well, that's what we're doing today. We're diving deep into Thucydides and his history of the Peloponnesian War.
Book I specifically.
Yeah.
It's like you brought these excerpts to us,
Yeah.
wanting to understand what really started this war, this massive conflict between the Peloponnesians and the Athenians.
Right, the core of it all.
So think of this like we're giving you a super focused briefing
Yeah, no extra fluff.
to help you grasp how it all began.
So we'll be looking at how Thucydides approached writing this history
Yeah, his methodology,
and the world of ancient Greece back then.
which is pretty wild,
It was, and of course, the specific events that led to this war.
to spark those aha moments you love.
Okay, so let's start with Thucydides himself. He wasn't just some guy writing down dates and names, was he?
Not at all. Right from the beginning, he's like, this war, this is going to be massive.
Like, he knew it was a big deal.
He says it's going to be greater and more worthy of relation than any that had preceded it.
Wow, he doesn't hold back.
And his reasons are interesting. He points to how prepared both sides were.
So it wasn't some accidental skirmish.
No, this was planned. Both sides knew it was coming.
And he talks about how this war pulled in the entire Hellenic world.
Everyone was involved.
Right.
He knew this wasn't just a local conflict.
It had implications for, like, the known world at the time.
Yeah, for a huge portion of it, it was a defining moment.
So it's fascinating how he went about documenting this war, too.
It's incredibly modern, almost scientific for his time.
Yeah, it wasn't just him saying, oh, and then this battle happened.
He was super dedicated to getting the facts right.
Mm.
He even talks about putting eyewitness accounts through the most severe and detailed tests possible.
Like, really grilling them.
Yeah, because he understood that memory can be tricky, especially with speeches.
Oh, yeah, trying to remember word for word what someone said years ago.
Impossible.
Pretty much.
So he focused on the general sense of those speeches, the main points, the demands, the core of the arguments.
That's interesting. And this really sets him apart from the poets or chroniclers.
Right, those guys often cared more about a good story than the truth.
Thucydides, though, he wanted to create something that would last.
Exactly, a possession for all time.
Not just something entertaining that people would forget about. He understood the power of real historical truth.
Absolutely. Knowing the past accurately, he saw that as valuable in the long term.
And it's impressive how he's willing to challenge what everyone believed, even back then.
You see that with the Athenian story about Hipparchus?
The guy who was assassinated, right?
Yeah, by Harmodius and Aristogiton. But Thucydides is like, hold on, that's not quite how it happened.
He's like a fact checker.
He points out that it was actually Hippias in power, not Hipparchus.
So he sets the record straight.
And he even explains why those guys did it, their personal motivations.
Wow. He's like, don't just believe what you hear. Let's get to the real story.
Exactly. And it makes you think even people living through these events could get things wrong.
So how much more do we need to question what we think we know about the past?
That's a good point. He even does this with the Lacedaemonian kings.
The Spartans?
Yeah, there was this common belief that each king had 2 votes.
Double the power.
And this idea about a special military company called the Company of Pitane,
Sounds elite.
Thucydides is like, nope, both wrong.
He's not afraid to debunk things.
Even about Sparta. And these might seem like small details,
But they show how dedicated he is to questioning everything.
even the stuff people took for granted.
He makes his whole history more reliable, doesn't it?
It does, but it also makes you think. Even with Thucydides, how can we keep digging deeper to understand the past?
Right, because there's always more to uncover. So, with Thucydides' obsession with accuracy as our starting point, let's go back to ancient Greece.
To the very beginning. He paints a picture of a world that's super different from the Greece we usually imagine with all these city-states.
It was way more chaotic back then, wasn't it?
It was incredibly unstable.
Not the picture of classical Greece we often have in our minds.
Not at all. He says ancient Hellas was full of migrations,
Like people constantly on the move.
constantly. No settled populations.
Not the stable borders and traditions we might think of.
Nope. Different groups were always being pushed around by stronger neighbors.
So there's this constant pressure, this sense of having to move to survive.
Exactly. And trade was limited.
No.
It was hard to communicate across long distances.
Both by land and sea.
Yeah. Everything contributed to this feeling of being uprooted, of not having a firm foundation.
It sounds like just surviving was the main goal.
Absolutely. Just getting by, not building these lasting structures or thinking long term.
Not like those grand temples or anything.
Not yet.
Why invest in all that if you might have to flee at any moment?
That's the point he's making. It's all about immediate needs,
Yeah.
immediate survival.
Makes sense. But he also talks about how fertile land in some places actually made things worse.
Right. It's a bit of a paradox.
Like, you'd think good land would mean a more stable society.
You would. But he uses places like Thessaly, Boeotia, and parts of the Peloponnese are examples.
Those were some of the richest agricultural areas.
Exactly. But all that abundance, it actually led to infighting.
People fighting over control of the resources.
Exactly. So they're so busy fighting each other.
They become vulnerable to outsiders.
Exactly. And to these shifts in population, it's almost like their wealth made them weaker.
It's like the opposite of what you'd expect.
It is. And he contrasts this with Attica.
The region around Athens?
Yeah. He uses it as a prime example of how these migrations held other places back.
Because Attica wasn't as fertile, right?
Yeah. The soil wasn't as good, so it wasn't as attractive a target for invaders.
Less to fight over.
And they had less of that internal conflict that messed things up elsewhere.
So they could develop more steadily.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Their population grew more organically, their political institutions too, and that stability is part of what allows Athens to become a major power.
It's fascinating how something that seems like a disadvantage, like poor soil, actually becomes an advantage in this context.
Yeah, it's a great illustration of how things aren't always what they seem.
So now, fast forwarding a bit,
For the rise of the big players, Athens and Sparta.
the clash of the Titans. But their ways of building alliances were totally different.
Fundamentally different.
And I think that's a big part of why they ended up at war.
Yeah, their approaches exposed their whole political philosophies. Sparta, they wanted subservient allies.
Like they were in charge, no question about it.
Exactly. And their main strategy, setting up oligarchies in the Allied states.
Governments ruled by a small elite.
Yep. That way, power was in the hands of people who would side with Sparta. Very. Although Thucydides doesn't come right out and say it, you got to wonder if Sparta's fear of the Helots played a role here.
The Helots, those were the people Sparta had essentially enslaved, right?
Yeah, basically. There
Yeah.
were way more Helots than Spartans.
A constant source of anxiety for them.
Absolutely. So maybe Sparta wanted tight control over their allies to prevent any uprisings inspired by the Helots.
Makes you wonder if paranoia fueled some of their decisions.
It's definitely possible. But meanwhile, Athens is doing things differently.
They weren't big on oligarchies, were they?
Not really.
No.
They did have a couple of exceptions, Chios and Lesbos.
Islands with strong navies.
Yeah, but for most of their allies, Athens took away their naval power.
So those allies couldn't challenge Athens at sea.
Smart move strategically. Instead of ships, Athens demanded tribute.
Money.
Lots of it, which they used to fund their own massive fleet.
Making them a naval superpower.
It's how they projected their power and influence. And what's really interesting is what Thucydides says about both Athens and Sparta. He observes that each of them had more resources on their own than all their allies combined.
Even when those alliances were at full strength.
Exactly. Which tells you something about these big alliances.
Maybe they weren't as strong as they seemed on paper.
Maybe loyalty was shaky, or logistics were tough, or maybe the dominant power just overshadowed everyone else.
So we've got these two powerhouses with totally different approaches, and tensions are rising.
And then you have the immediate triggers, those flashpoints that really push things towards war.
But I think Thucydides makes a really important distinction.
Yeah, he talks about the real cause.
The one that's often hidden, the deeper reason.
And he's clear about what it is.
The growth of the power of Athens, he says.
And the alarm which this inspired in Lacedaemon.
Basically, Sparta was freaked out by how powerful Athens was becoming.
And all these other incidents.
They were just symptoms of that deeper issue.
Yeah, exactly. But he still dives into the specifics because those complaints were what shattered the peace.
Let's start with Epidamnus.
That one seems like a minor squabble that blew up.
A chain reaction. Epidamnus was a colony of Corinth.
Yep.
And they had some internal problems, some political turmoil.
One faction got kicked out,
And they went running to Corcyra for help.
which was itself a colony of Corinth.
So it's Corinth versus Corcyra, a family feud, essentially.
Right. But then Corcyra, feeling outnumbered, turns to Athens.
And Athens has a tough decision to make,
because Corcyra had a pretty big navy,
second only to Athens itself.
making them a valuable ally in the region.
So Athens couldn't just ignore this.
It wasn't just about picking sides in a petty fight. It was about the balance of power at sea.
And Corcyra makes some good points.
Oh yeah, they point to a clause in the existing treaty, the one between Athens and Sparta.
A loophole.
Sort of. It says that neutral states can join either side.
So Corcyra's like, hey, we're neutral. We can join you.
Right. But they also play the what-if card.
They say, imagine if Corinth wins and their navy gets even stronger.
And what if they start using ships crewed by your own subjects?
That's got to make Athens nervous.
It does. But the most convincing argument might be the simplest one.
We both hate Corinth. So let's team up.
A classic enemy of my enemy is my friend situation.
It's a tempting offer for Athens, but risky.
Because aligning with Corcyra is basically poking the bear.
Yeah, Corinth is going to be furious. And Sparta's not going to be happy either.
It shows how fragile the peace was.
How one wrong move could shatter everything.
And then you have the Potidaea affair.
More tangled loyalties.
This time it's Corinthian settlers inside the Athenian alliance.
Causing trouble.
So Potidaea, it was a Corinthian colony, but also part of the Athenian League.
A tricky situation.
And Corinth, they're stirring the pot, encouraging Potidaea to rebel against Athens,
And Sparta's secretly backing them up.
undermining Athens from within.
Classic strategy. So, Athens is understandably worried. They see a rebellion brewing in a strategically vital spot.
And they know outside forces are involved, so they issue some demands.
Trying to assert their authority.
They tell Potidaea to tear down their walls.
No more fortifications.
They want hostages to guarantee good behavior.
A classic power move.
And they say, kick out those Corinthian officials.
Get rid of the troublemakers.
It's a direct challenge to Corinth and Sparta.
And it just ramps up the tension even more.
Layer by layer. And then you have the Megarian decrees.
Those were harsh, like economic warfare.
Athens basically shuts Megara out completely.
Megara was part of the Peloponnesian League.
Yep, Sparta's side.
So Athens bans Megarian ships from their harbors and their agora.
The central marketplace.
No Megarian goods allowed.
And they tell their allies to do the same. No trading with Megara.
Trying to cripple their economy.
It was a serious escalation. And Corinth, they see it as a blatant violation of the treaty.
An act of war, practically.
Yeah. And it creates this wave of anger towards Athens across the Peloponnese.
So you've got all these simmering conflicts, these broken agreements, and it all boils over at the Congress at Lacedaemon.
The big meeting.
This is where the gloves come off. What were the main arguments on each side?
So Sparta's allies, they come in with a list of grievances.
Years of frustration pouring out.
Corinth, they take the lead.
They'd been clashing with Athens for a while.
They point to Potidaea, to Megara. They're like, look, Athens broke the treaty. They can't be trusted.
Painting Athens as the aggressor.
Totally. And they warn the other Peloponnesian allies, the ones who aren't on the coast.
The ones who might think, oh, this doesn't affect me.
Corinth's like, wake up. Athens is hungry for power. They'll come for you next.
So they're trying to unify everyone against Athens.
Absolutely. They basically say, Athens is a threat to all of us.
So what does Athens say in response?
They try to defend their action.
Reading their case.
They start by reminding everyone of the Persian Wars.
When all of Greece united against the Persians.
And they emphasize how important Athens was in that victory.
Especially their navy.
Right, they're like, remember who saved you from the Persians.
A bit of guilt tripping.
Maybe a little. They also talk about their leadership of the Delian League.
Which by this point had become the Athenian Empire.
Right. They're like, yeah, we're in charge, but we're fair.
And we provide protection for our allies.
And we keep things in order.
Unlike Sparta, who might be a bit harsher.
It's implied, but it's there. And about Epidamnus and Potidaea, they give their side of the story.
Their interpretation of events.
They even suggest arbitration.
A peaceful way to settle things.
But they also issue a warning. They're like, starting a war is a huge risk.
Things could spiral out of control.
Think about the consequences.
So they're appealing to logic, to reason, but also to fear.
Yeah, they know a war between Athens and Sparta would be devastating.
And not just for them, but for everyone.
Exactly.
And within Sparta, there's disagreement about what to do.
Archidamus, one of the Spartan kings, he urges caution.
He was known for being wise and strategic.
He'd seen a lot of wars. He's like, look, if we're going to do this, we need to be prepared.
Especially financially.
Wars are expensive.
And he acknowledges how strong Athens is.
With all those tribute-paying allies and that powerful navy, he's basically saying, this won't be easy.
Don't underestimate them.
Exactly. He thinks they should negotiate more.
Buy some time.
Don't rush into a decision based on anger.
A voice of reason.
But then there's Sthenelaitis, another influential Spartan.
And he's way more hawkish.
He's all about action. He dismisses all the talk and debate.
He's like, we've heard enough complaints. Athens is the aggressor. We need to defend our allies.
He appeals to Spartan honor, to their sense of duty.
He's playing on their emotions.
And it works.
So in the end, Sparta votes for war.
Despite Archidamus's warnings.
They just couldn't get past their fear of
The
Athens.
fear had been building for years.
And the complaints of their allies, especially Corinth, pushed them over the edge.
They just couldn't ignore the pressure anymore.
So we've gone back to the beginning. We've seen Greece in its early, unstable days.
And how Thucydides meticulously documented everything.
We've seen how Athens and Sparta rose to power, but with completely different methods.
And how a series of crises, each escalating the tension, led to that final meeting at Lacedaemon.
It's a fascinating but kind of scary example of how wars can happen.
How even when there are people urging caution, the momentum towards conflict can be unstoppable.
Thucydides shows us how the real cause can be obscured, hidden beneath the surface.
How fear and ambition can drive nations to make decisions that they'll later regret.
And it makes you think about the conflicts happening in our own world.
Yeah. What are the real causes today?
Yeah.
What's driving the tensions between different countries? What are we missing? What's beneath the surface?
Hopefully this deep dive has given you a solid understanding of how the Peloponnesian War began.
We've covered the key details, the different perspectives, and now you're equipped to understand what happens next as this war unfolds and reshapes the ancient world.
As you keep learning about this period, think about what Thucydides teaches us about power, fear, and the dangers of miscalculation. Think about those hidden forces that can drive events even when people are trying to avoid disaster.
It's a lesson that's as relevant today as it was back then.
It definitely makes you think. And on that note, we'll wrap up for today. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive.
Until next time.